Good day everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Glenn Pajares, and in this video I'll be explaining the difference between non-moral standards and moral standards. What are non-moral standards? These are policies, rules and guidelines, criteria that have nothing to do with morality. In other words, if you do actions either conforming or non-conforming to the standards, your actions do not become immoral. Or in other words, these rules and standards don't entail or imply morality at all. On the contrary, moral standards are rules, policies, guidelines, rubrics, and criteria in which actions need to conform. Otherwise, if they don't conform to these standards, then these actions will be rendered immoral. So let us go to the examples of non-moral standards. Examples of non-moral standards are etiquette, rules of the game, we have fashion rules, and other criteria that have nothing to do with morality. So let us start with fashion rules or fashion standards. For example, there is a fad or trend today that people wear in terms of clothing, and you don't conform to it. So it might be out of style or wrong in the eyes of people, but by not conforming to them, your actions or what you wear don't make you immoral. Another example of non-moral standards that we have mentioned is the rules of the game. So let us say basketball. So if you violate a rule of basketball, for example, you committed a foul. Committing a foul does not necessarily mean that you have become immoral or the act of fouling is immoral. Another is etiquette. For example, in the Philippines, you are not allowed to speak with your mouth is full. So even if you violate it, it might be wrong in the eyes of the Filipinos, but it does not necessarily make you immoral. Whereas when it comes to moral standards, let us say abortion is wrong by virtue of natural philosophy or virtue ethics or deontology or duty ethics, then by violating this standard, the act of abortion is wrong or is evil or immoral. So that's the difference between moral standards and non-moral standards. Moral standards are by nature serious. Violating them would result serious consequences. And of course, conforming to these standards gain or merit a lot of benefit. Whereas violating or committing actions in line or against non-moral standards don't render serious consequences or great benefit at all. Also, moral standards are universal in nature. In other words, they apply to all people in all circumstances and in all conditions. Non-moral standards are not necessarily universal because they are based on culture and traditions, and we all know that culture and traditions vary from one people or community to the other. So what one culture considers right or wrong might not be right or wrong for other cultures. So non-moral standards are not universal in nature. And of course, moral standards are not just created by some people or certain authorities, because even if these people in authority will not be elected or will no longer hold in office, the truth and the fact about moral standard will always remain true. So that's the difference, the major difference between moral standards and non-moral standards. And why do we need to know the difference? It's because in life we need to understand and live with others harmoniously, and of course avoid conflict and live in peace. So if we have the knowledge between moral and non-moral standards, we are able to adjust and adapt and live harmoniously with people without necessarily violating what they consider moral and what they consider immoral. Besides, moral standards can be imposed or can be demanded universally to all people, but non-moral standards cannot. So when it comes to morality, yes, we are culpable and accountable of the consequences of our actions. But when it comes to moral standards, we cannot really demand culpability or punish people for violating non-moral standards. So knowing them better, understanding them more, will give people a lot of leverage. But it is very important to note that there are some non-moral standards that may become moral in certain circumstances and conditions, like religious rituals and practices and some of the beliefs and some laws or legal statutes and traditions are generally non-moral. But in some cases, they become moral. So it's very important to be critical, to be analytic in order to determine which standards are moral or non-moral. Thank you very much for listening and watching. Please click like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel and be updated with the next episode.